to Waiver, I think so.
Yeah, no, that would be good. And you already might be knowing Amitendu Palit's work. He's at ISAS in Singapore, and has been contributing immensely on what position developing countries should take at WTO, and how their trade strategies can be leveraged for collective gain, and how ASEAN has been placing. So Amitendu has been playing an important role, and he very often contributes in newspapers to get large discussions going. So that is extremely good.
Thank you.
We are just waiting for our chair to join. He's having some struggle with the access, so my colleagues are helping him resolve. So, Carlos, this idea of we sharing the publication soon with the missions of developing countries in Geneva is a very welcome decision, and I understood from Ravi that this idea is taking some shape now.
That's, of course, yeah, that will be very important in order to promote an active participation from developing countries in these negotiations. So also we hope that the Southeast region will be active.
I think that would be very, very interesting. Amitendu, you see much purpose in such an endeavor with our developing countries, friends, and missions in Geneva?
Yeah, of course, because now I think there must be an active participation by all members of WTO. Of course, as you know, this has been essentially promoted by South Africa and India with the support of a large number of countries. And now is the time for all missions in Geneva to contribute constructively in order to get this waiver approved. So there will be a need of appropriate strategy in order to get that, and also, of course, of the skills, the diplomatic skills, in order to ensure that the waiver is straightforward, is not full of conditions, as it was the case with the previous waiver, which became later Article 31 piece. So we need to avoid such a situation, and also to ensure that the waiver is negotiated rapidly, because we cannot wait for a long time in order to get this. So let's hope that we can contribute to that process.
Absolutely right. I see that our chair has already joined. Dr. Phillips, Vermonte, can you hear us? Can you see us? Your camera is not on, so I wonder whether you're fully connected. Yes, there you are. Sorry. Most welcome. Thank you. Thank you. So, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, great pleasure in having our chair now. And on behalf of RIS, I would very much like Professor Ravi Srinivas to welcome. Our chair is already connected now, and we are sort of all set now to start. And I would request my senior colleague, Professor Krishna Ravi Srinivas, who has been leading these debates and discussions. And as you might have already gathered, this is the last segment of a 4-part series that RIS and South Center have partnered for last 4 Saturdays. And the first one led by Carlos himself, we had a very, very interesting, very substantive panel to talk about the broad issues that TRIPS waiver has raised. Then we had gone to Africa, and we had several speakers from Africa to reflect how we are placed to take advantage of TRIPS waiver, what kind of impediments are there. And then last Saturday, we were in Latin America, and we had speakers from Carlos' own country, Argentina, but also all the neighborhood. So that region was represented, and we had very good, very interesting discussion. Today, we are with our colleagues from ASEAN, and our idea, Dr. Vermonte, is to come up with a publication in near future to aid and provide support to all the missions of various southern countries to support their negotiations at the TRIPS, tax-based negotiations at WTO. So with these words, I once again very warmly welcome everyone and would like my colleague, Professor Krishna Ravi Srinivas, to add his words of welcome before I request Carlos. So, Professor Ravi Srinivas.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants and speakers, esteemed speakers from all parts of the world. It's my pleasure to give the welcome address and opening remarks in this fourth webinar of this webinar series, which was initiated after much discussion between South Center and RIS, particularly with both Professor Carlos Correa and Professor Sachin Trivedi leading that effort. So, as we all know, that negotiations are to begin, text-based negotiations to begin, and we are in the stage now. In the last three webinars, we realized a couple of things like the TRIPS waiver is not something that is not just necessary. It has to go beyond that. In the sense that we need to build upon the TRIPS waiver to achieve a holistic, full-fledged solution and not just stop with some minor increments here and there or some minor patch-up work here and there. So we need to have a holistic framework that will involve logistics, finance, technology transfer, and more importantly, the southern nations coming together, the trilateral cooperation and all. As of now, we are seeing a couple of things which are very interesting developments. One, both the three agencies, WTO, WHO, and WIPO are coming together to address some of these issues. To what extent they will be able to do justice is something that we have to wait and see. And two, the mRNA platform, which has been being set up in South Africa with active support of WHO, is a welcome initiative. But again, here, how much technology they will get, who will support, how much of the facilities they'll be able to generate and manage and mobilize is another issue. Then you also find a lot of interest or spurt in the developed countries giving us or giving the world vaccines as donation, doing this or doing that. Even as you know, there's an enormous pressure on EU to open up to the waiver of TRIPS waiver idea and then support it unilaterally. Although I mean, EU is still pushing for compulsory licensing based text negotiations. So we are entering in a crucial phase in the TRIPS waiver at this stage. And now in the next few weeks will be the ones that will make or break this deadlock. I'm sure that developing nations will put up a solid fight, and then more important, they'll be able to convince those who are sitting on the fence as well as those who are opposing it tooth and nail now. So the challenge before developing nations, or for that matter, the world is not simple. It's very complicated. Fortunately, because there is again the demand or the reasoning or the logic which says that there's nothing wrong with the IPOs or TRIPS, but only the question of arranging it or using the compulsory licensing, giving more of technology transfer, giving more of finance, setting up more manufacturing facilities, transfer of some of these things here, coming together and all. But that is not going to work. We need to demonstrate one thing very clearly, that TRIPS waiver is the minimum requirement. It is not the only thing, it's the minimum requirement which we need, so that this vaccine crisis, the equity issue in vaccine can be addressed fully. But as the TRIPS waiver says, we need to go beyond the vaccines. We need to look into diagnostics, medical devices, the whole gamut of things that we need to address the pandemic in an equitable way, so that the humankind is safe from the next pandemic or whatever be the next ones. We should be very careful about it. Having said this, I think it's a time to revisit the whole idea of IP, innovation, incentive debate also. And here, the developing nations have to really walk the talk, not just by asking for TRIPS waiver, but also going beyond that by trying to put forth some novel mechanism that can be combined with the TRIPS waiver to facilitate incentivization for innovation, and also looking at various other options like open source discovery, open innovation, setting up technology commons, patent pools, and other mechanisms that can supplement and complement what we are asking for in the TRIPS waiver. Now, in the four webinars, from these things, I think we'll be able to pick up a lot of important points, come up with a coherent analysis with a cogent way, and then propose a way forward as how the developing nations in the world should look at the TRIPS waiver and they take the next steps. I am sure that the discussions today from the esteemed participants who represent various stakeholders in Southeast Asia will give us much wisdom and thought into it. And more importantly, I think by combining all the 4 webinars, we'll be able to get a spectrum of ideas that can really result in actionable ideas with a lot of pragmatic sense we will fit them. So with these words, I welcome Professor Carlos Correa to give his opening remarks and welcome address. I also welcome Professor Vermonte to chair the session, and then we have an excellent panel, and then to be followed by the discussion, Mr. Nirmalia Syam, who will also propose the vote of thanks. Over to you, Professor Carlos Correa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi, for this very substantive introduction. So thank you also to the panelists and the chair of the session. The South Center is really very pleased to co-organize these webinars with RIS as one of the most important think tanks in the South, in developing countries. And we are very, very happy that we were able to organize this for the Southeast region. So let me just make a couple of comments in relation to the subject of this webinar. The first place, Southeast Asia region accounts for 8.5% of the world population. And certainly then the waiver and the outcomes of the negotiations that are starting in Geneva are very relevant for the people living in this region. In addition to this, interestingly, some of the countries that belong to the region have started their own development of COVID-19 vaccines. In the case of Thailand, for instance, Thailand is one of the few countries that has under development a vaccine based on the new platform of messenger RNA technology. This is very interesting because developed countries and their experts are saying that this platform is so sophisticated that it wouldn't be possible for a developing country to produce a vaccine based on this technology. But interestingly, Thailand is quite advanced in developing a vaccine based on this new platform, and this is very encouraging. I've also seen information indicating that in the case of Vietnam, there are four vaccines candidates which are under development in Vietnam, and this also shows the capacity that does exist in the region, not only to produce vaccines that have been developed elsewhere, but also to develop their own vaccines that may help to address this crisis, and in particular, it may boost South-South cooperation. In our view, in the view of the South Center, South-South cooperation may be one of the most important tools in order to address this pandemic and perhaps future pandemics if such is the case. Second observation is about discussions on the waiver, which as Sachin and Ravi has mentioned, they are right now starting in Geneva. So it's very important for the countries of the Southeast region to participate in an active manner. It's important for all developing countries to be active, constructive in these discussions in order to ensure that the waiver is adopted. Of course, as we know, there will be opposition. There will be perhaps some strategies in order to delay the discussions. So it's very important for us to be clear about what the scope of the waiver should be. As you know, for instance, in the case of the United States, although they have accepted to enter into text-based discussions, they are perhaps aiming at a waiver with a limited scope, limited vaccines, limited to patents, and the proposals made by India and South Africa, as you may know, are broader in coverage. So discussing about what the scope of the waiver is very important. It's also relevant to know that a waiver is an integral part of the WTO architecture. So this is not such an extraordinary measure. In fact, there was already a waiver granted in connection with pharmaceuticals, as you certainly know, in 2003, in order to allow for compulsory licensing for export to countries without manufacturing capacity or insufficient manufacturing capacity. So there is nothing completely new about granting a waiver. It will also be important to dismiss some of the arguments which are articulated, for instance, by the European Commission, indicating that a waiver will deprive the pharmaceutical industry from any incentive to produce new vaccines or new products. So it's very important to be clear about what the nature of a waiver is. The waiver is of voluntary nature. the fact that the waiver is approved will just allow members of WTO which wish not to enforce patents or other rights not to do so. But the waiver will not be mandatory. So if jurisdictions such as the European Union or the United States, they wish to continue providing intellectual property protection for patents, know-how, designs, etc., they can do that. So the waiver will not oblige them to terminate such rights or incentives, and therefore there might be a very limited impact in terms of the incentives that are provided for industry, in particular in those countries where big companies operate. So I think we need to be very clear about this and dismiss the idea that a waiver will terminate all in such a significant manner incentives in order to produce new developments. In addition to this, as this crisis has made it very clear, when emergency like this comes out, governments finance. So in the case of the Western companies that have developed vaccines for COVID-19, governments and other institutions finance most of the research and development costs. Some studies indicate that up to 97% of the research and development costs were financed on the basis of subsidies which the companies have received. In the case of Moderna, for instance, they received close to $2 billion in subsidies in order to develop the vaccine. So there is a need to dismiss the arguments about the negative impact that the waiver may have in terms of current and in particular future development. So thank you very much again for our distinguished panelists and chair. So we hope that we'll have very fruitful discussions, that this webinar will contribute to this active participation from Southeast Asian countries in these debates. And certainly this will help the countries in the region both to expand local production if the waiver is adopted, and also to facilitate the importation of products that otherwise may be infringing in the case that a waiver is not approved. So thank you very much again, and I'm looking forward again for a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you. Thanks, Carlos. Now I have great pleasure in inviting my very dear friend and Executive Director of the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Jakarta, Professor Phillips Vermonte, who has been one of the most preeminent commentator on how partnerships for ASEAN are evolving, what kind of priority issues are they, and how trade, economy, and business linkages are going to be fruitfully leveraged by ASEAN and by other countries. His role is now becoming extremely important as his institute would play an extremely important role in the G20 presidency of Indonesia in near future. He's also going to be an extremely important person in the future in terms of how the partnership with India and Indonesia as change of presidencies would happen in next 2 years, and both of us would be part of Troika. And as you would know, T20 is one of the most important connects between this. So I'm extremely delighted to invite you, Professor Vermonte, and I hope our partnership would deepen further in the months to come. The South Center is a great partner, and I'm extremely glad that both Carlos and me, we are very happy to welcome you to this platform. So floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi. Before I start, I'd like to ask, this session is going to be 1.5 hours because I got mixed up in terms of timing. So that means 1.5 hours from now, we would end this session, right? Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank RIS for inviting me to chair this session, and Sachin reminded us about the important role of ASEAN. And as you might know, by way of introduction, ASEAN is now facing 2 big issues. Number one is to recover from the COVID-19, but number two we have a problem in Myanmar. So there are so many things on our plate right now. And as Sachin mentioned earlier, that in the next 1 or 2 years, Indonesia and India would be, partnering in terms of G20. And we are delighted to report that CSIS is part of the T20, and we start working together with our counterparts, especially India and other countries. Now, I'd like to remind the speaker on this panel on the TRIPS waiver issues and challenges for Southeast Asia. I believe all the speakers have received the idea, the terms of reference sent to all of you about the key points that we are going to discuss in the session, and some key questions as well. So number one, as also mentioned by Professor Correa earlier, that TRIP waiver is an important platform, an important initiative. It's not a question of a charity. It is a call to find solutions. And then right now we are in the middle of the pandemic, and for sure, this is going to be an issue that we have to find an agreement and implement. And number two, waiver is absolutely necessary and has to be supplemented or complemented with many other measures. So we are hoping that in this panel, we could come up with some ideas. What would be that other measures that would complement this waiver? Number three, I think the urgency to increase the availability of vaccine across countries is widely acknowledged, but as we know, the WHO's COVAX facility has not received support necessary, including financial resources and so on and so forth. That would also become a problem for all of us. So I don't know, or probably some of the speakers will touch this issue as well. And then lastly, of course, there's a question about consensus and implementation, because right now, as it is written in the terms of reference, there's fragmentation. So how we are going to deal with this? Now, secondly, the 5 key questions that we are hoping to get the answers from in this panel is that how access, equity, and inclusion be ensured for vaccine distribution, what impact of geopolitics, and what role for the CSOs. And as you see, we have a very nice panel that will, various types of organization. We have CSO, academics, and so on. So this question, I think, might be dealt with in the session. And then another question is compulsory license a better option? Number 3, does the recent counter proposal by EU makes any sense? Number 4, how lack of access to mRNA and other medical technologies and raw materials going to limit the TRIPS waiver? Question number 5, how developing countries can wrap up their production capacities, and what roles of the other the financial institutions in this regard. So with this reminder, I'd like to introduce our panel. We are going to have Mr. Chalermsak Kittitrakul, the Executive Director of, I'm sorry, I lost my notes here. The Executive Director of the Center of AIDS Access Foundation in Thailand. Second speaker, we have Dr. Amitendu Palit, Senior Research Fellow and Research Lead, Trade and Economics, Institute of South Asian Studies of NUS in Singapore. We have Dr. Tran Kien, School of Law, Vietnam National University in Hanoi, and School of Law, University of Glasgow, and Mr. Tony Salvador, Third World Network of the Philippines. And then we are going to have discussion, Mr. Nilmalya Syam, Senior Program Officer, Health, Intellectual Property and Biodiversity Program at Subcenter in Geneva. Now, I'd like to invite the first speaker, Mr. Jockey of the AIDS Access Foundation in Thailand. The floor is yours. I hope you can present in about 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you, Philip. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to thank you, RDS and Southcenter as well, that invited me to be a part of this discussion. I'm going to speak on behalf of the Thai Civil Society that working on promotion of the access to medicine in Thailand. And I have some slide to share. Okay. Okay. Can you see my slide right now? Hello. Can you
Yes,
see
we
my
can.
slide
Yes.
right now? Okay. I'm gonna speak about what we have done so far in terms of the common access to medicine and how civil society has been involved in the TRIPS waiver as well. Before that, I'd like to give you some idea of what the challenges that are happening so far in Thailand in terms of COVID-19. This is how far we can go in terms of access to COVID-19 vaccine. From the presentation, this slide, you're going to see that we can go very slow. Really, only 3.5% of the population have been fully vaccinated. So we have a lot more to go for that. And we still have facing many challenges happening so far, including the mutant COVID virus as well. That's going to get the resistance to some vaccine as well. So it's quite a challenge for the Thai people in terms of vaccine. And anyway, as you know, that it has been blocked or prevented due to the IP system that not allow the country or the company that have capacity to produce cannot to do it. And secondly, I want to mention about the medicine as well, because we have a limited access to vaccine, so we still need some medicine as well. This is the case about favipiravir. Actually, it's an old drug. The patent on ARP has been expired already. But what the drug company have done, they filed the other type of patent application in Thailand. They filed for the formulation, the tablet formulation in that the next slide. For this slide, I would like to give you an idea that how many kind of the vaccine that are available in Thailand so far. Actually, they have about 7 vaccine has been approved by our Thai FDA. And 2 of them, AstraZeneca and Srinivas, is provided by the government for free. So the people can access to these 2 vaccines for free. And the card that I mentioned before is the AstraZeneca and Shingrix vaccine. And anyway, we have a new vaccine is coming to Thailand as well, Sinopharm. But anyway, it has been approved. But anyway, the government's gonna give it. If you want to get the Sinopharm vaccine, you have to pay it yourself. It's not for free. So it's an option because the government has been pressures by the society quite a lot that we don't have enough vaccine. So the government are trying to do something else as an option. So if you like to get the faster, the vaccination, you can go to the Sinopharm you have to pay it by yourself. But anyway, we have another 3 vaccine has been approved already, J&J, Moderna, and Pfizer, but it's not available yet. For the best case scenario, it's going to available in Thailand in Q3 or Q4 of this year, but that's very opportunistic. Yeah. And this is the vaccine that I will mention. I actually have 2 more vaccines that are in the process to get the registration with the Thai FDA, that the Sputnik and another one from China as well. And in terms of medicine, as I mentioned earlier, that we used to have a problem in access to medicine as well. Thailand still need the medicine for the COVID-19 treatment. I'm talking about favipiravir. Favipiravir is an old drug. ARP has been expired already in terms of patent, but the drug company filed application for tablet formulation that considered as the evergreen patent. It's not supposed to be get the patent at all, but they filed in Thailand. And civil society now filed opposition against the application. And anyway, the IP haven't done a good job. They'll just leave it. We filed opposition in July last year. Until January, there any decision come from out of the IP yet. So we still keep to put the pressure and try to have a dialogue with the IP that they supposed to fasten their examination and revoke and reject this application. But anyway, we still keep the pressure until at the end of the day in May this year, they have the decision to reject it. And that allow our local manufacturer, the government pharmaceutical organization, GPO, can produce it Right now, they are in the process of to get approval from the Thai FDA. But so far, we import the generic version from China and India for the last 3 months for the consumption in the country. And to be able to get the approval and able to distribute the medicine in September this year. But anyway, they have a lot of 2 more applications, 5 for favipiravir as well for the injection formulation. So what I would like to say, intellectual property is a barrier to access to essential medicine or even the vaccine as well. COVID-19 is just a tip of the iceberg. Actually, in the past, you have a lot of suffering from the IP protection. How many people die of HIV/AIDS? How many people has died of TB? And how many people have died of HCV? Even these diseases is curable, but they cannot access to the medicine because of patent protection. So what we are right now, we are trying to do at Access Foundation and our allied organization under the name of the group, Make Medicine Affordable. We have the member in the 18 countries. So we try to point it out that the patent system right now is broken. It's not workable at all. Millions of people die each year of the curable diseases. Patent application get reward, but no innovation. And corporation profit off our interest. As Carlos Correa mentioned, many clinical trial for vaccine and medicine get the money support from the public, from the government, but the corporation, the drug company get the profit out of this. So this showed it out very clear that patent system is not working, it's broken. So we are now running the campaign globally under the campaign name Medicine Equality Now, because we see that TRIPS agreement, patent protection system is doing harmful more than, improve the technology transfer and new medicine. So it's kind of like to prolong the patent monopoly on that. So we are running the campaign, according to the COVID-19. But we have seen that it's not just only limited to COVID-19 only. We have the other diseases as well, that the medicine is so expensive. Vaccine is very expensive. So it's supposed to be more than vaccine or even medicine, but over also the COVID-19 as well. So now come to the point, what we have get involved and what we have heard from the policymaker, according to the meeting, according to the policy dialogue that we have delivered to our government. Firstly, we ran the roundtable meeting in a small group discussion, about 20 people, have the many stakeholder groups, including the big pharma and local manufacturers as well. So it's very clear that PRIMA is the Association of Multinational Drug Companies in Thailand. They strongly oppose the idea of trip waiver, that Thai government should not go to that. Secondly, we have mentioned about compulsory licensing as well. So it may work, but only for the patent. But how about trade secret? And how about the industrial design? So it's not covered. It's just covered only patent, and it's not easy to use at all. Thailand had experience before 10 years ago, issued the compulsory licensing, but along the process is not easy at all. It requires very strong political will. So that may be the barrier for the COVID-19. And about the voluntary licensing, we have a lot of question, a lot of wondering about how it's work, voluntary licensing. Based on Thailand experience, it's not working that good at all. They have a problem in terms of lack of transparency. We have no idea how they negotiate between the licensor and licensee, and what is price come from, and what is the criteria who's going to get the benefit out of the drugs from the voluntary license. And technical transfer, we haven't seen that. We just get the finished product, but the technical transfer haven't happened in the reality. Last but not least, about the price. The price is still quite high compared to the other generic that in the country that have no patent. So that the issue or the problem of voluntary license. Sorry. Yeah, the point that also mentioned in Thailand, we think that we have the limited capacity of local manufacturer. comparing between Thailand and India, we are not that advanced. We still have to rely on tech transfer and have to rely on the API raw material from the other country as well. So some people in the meeting mentioned about if Thailand joined trip waiver, how we can get the benefit out of it, because our local manufacturer don't have the capacity enough to produce our API alone, our own, or even to have the tech transfer. We have to rely on the tech transfer from the originator company as well. And the next one, that's quite a crucial question in the Thai society. Even we have some vaccine available, they had a question about efficacy, particularly about Sinovac. We had a question about safety and quality of the generic vaccine or generic medicine. So there's a kind of concern that coming up as well if we want to join the TRIPS waiver. And yeah, mention again, tech transfer and API, how it's going to make it happen in Thailand. And current position of Thailand in the WTO. I heard from the Ministry of Commerce, they confirmed that Thailand have to support the third way. It's actually the volume license proposed by the EU, by the European country. They go for that. But anyway, we try to convince that it doesn't work based on our experience. And we have to support the trip waiver, and this more than 60 countries has been support, but Thailand is supposed to support as well. And in terms of policymaker, as far as we have a discussion with them, it's quite clear that Mr. Public Health, why they support the trip waiver, because it's a chance for Thailand to get benefit out of this. Even, don't take a risk to issue the CDL and get the retaliation from the big pharma or the other developed country. But if the trip waiver has been approved, it means that all the WTO members have legitimacy to make use of it. But anyway, if you talk to the Ministry of Commerce, they have a different idea. They try to give the reason they have to balance between the profit of the people and also the profit of the investor, the profit of the local manufacturer as well. So they are not opposed, but at the same time not support the trip waiver yet. But we hope that according to our last meeting 2 weeks ago, that they will gonna change the idea and also go to the support the trip waiver at the same time, maybe the third way as well, as the two options at the same time for Thailand. But I have no idea so far what is the final decision they're gonna make about the trips waiver. Yeah, so I would like to end my presentation that to call for if you are interested and would like to support our campaign, not just only in Thailand, but also in the other country as well, that to make sure that people can access to vaccine and the diagnostic kit and also the medicine to fight against the COVID-19, please go to this makemedicineaffordable.org. You can go to this campaign page. And also, as I mentioned again, that it's not supposed to limit to only COVID-19, but also the other diseases as well, and not just only limit to patent, but also the different kind of IP as well that block access to those essential medicine and vaccine. Thank you.
Thank you, Jockey, for the for brief us on the Thailand case. And if I may, there are 3 points that you are trying to highlight. Number one, the IP is a barrier, and then the question on the COVID-19 vaccines related IP related on COVID-19 is just a tip of an iceberg of inequality of medicines. Number two, you are highlighting that basically patent system is broken. And then the number three, with regard to the licenses, you highlight the problem with the compulsory license that requires very strong policy will. And then on voluntary license, you are highlighting the fact that there is still lack of transparency. And then there's a problem of technology transfer, and then the high prices. And then most interestingly, I think, is the what you hear from the policymakers in Thailand, and the differences between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Trade regarding their stakeholders. And that, I think, would resonate with other countries in Southeast Asia. Next, I would like to invite our second speaker, Dr. Palit from the Institute of South Asian Studies of the National University of Singapore, and 15 minutes is yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Vermonte. Thank you so much, RIS, and my very good and old friend, Professor Chalermsak, for inviting me to participate in this extremely informative, timely, and enriching discussion. I must congratulate the RIS for putting together this very educative and I would say broadly illuminating series of seminars on the subject of the trade waiver. Now, I would what I try to do is that I think my preceding speaker really illustrated a large number of factual points very effectively, particularly with respect to the situation in Thailand. I'd like to take a more broad overview of the Southeast Asian region and share with you for greater discussion a few overall points. The first point that I would like to mention in this regard is that if we look at the current rate of vaccination in the region, we notice a fair degree of difference in the way vaccination has been proceeded. So let's say, for example, if the current numbers that we see till about the middle of the month, middle of June, then we see Singapore having been able to vaccinate almost half of its population with at least one dose. And the next country after Singapore is Cambodia, as far as the share of the population is concerned. And thereafter, the gap seems to be bunching together. But one of the important points that comes out in this regard is that it is not that the countries do not want to vaccinate people, but it is just that in the process of vaccination, there are challenges which they are encountering. And there are multiple challenges in this regard, one of which very clearly relates to the supply side problem. And the supply side problem is the lack of availability of sufficient vaccines for the region. Now, I think it's important to note that the COVID-19 pandemic has been an evolving pandemic. And we now have seen almost 18 months of the pandemic. And from the time the pandemic first impacted the world, and Asia and Southeast Asia were among the earliest regions to actually experience the impact of the pandemic. Southeast Asia was also among those regions of the world which actually handled the pandemic rather well in the first part of the outbreak. And that had much to do with its prior experience of handling the SARS virus. It had much to do with the precautionary practices in place, largely coming out of a population used to acting against pandemic. But then subsequently, as the COVID-19 kept evolving, and the ability of the virus to spread and mutate became very visible, it also became clear that this was not something temporary. This is going to go on. As a result of which, vaccination became an extremely important policy weapon for tackling this pandemic. This was not the situation during SARS. SARS was something which came and went. But insofar as COVID is concerned, this is not going to go. And there is an importance in this regard of adjusting to the new normal in terms of accepting the reality that since countries and communities and populations and businesses will have to live with the pandemic, there will have to be ways of coexisting with the pandemic in a safe and effective fashion, both from a public health objective as well as from an economic and development objective. And this is precisely where for Southeast Asia as a region, the question of trip patterns waiver becomes extremely important. Southeast Asia is a heterogeneous region as far as economic structures, economic capacities, business development, industrial potential is concerned. And that again has become evident insofar as the current progress on vaccination is concerned. For the region as such, it is not possible for all countries to contract upfront with vaccine developers on advance purchase agreements. Some countries like Singapore have been able to do that. Malaysia have been able to do that. Partly Indonesia has been able to do that, but maybe not all countries, particularly not the relatively lower income countries, are in a position to do that. So the reliance of a large number of countries on the region on the WHO's COVAX facility is extremely large. And the COVAX facility cannot be augmented unless and until the intellectual property barriers are taken off on global mass production of vaccines. That is a clear given. So that is one of the important reasons why it is essential for the countries in the region to understand the importance of not just taking the waivers off on vaccines, but also ensuring that it is just not vaccines, but a set of allied products, including the drugs that will be administered now and in future for tackling the infected patients, including the accessories that are being utilized for tackling COVID-19 treatment, to have them made available and make them move cross-border as freely as possible, and to ensure that intellectual property does not become a challenge in this regard. And I think Chair alluded to this fact in the beginning, that this is a principle which needs to be invented. This is the principle which is very much embedded in the structure and concept of the TRIPS agreement of the WTO. So it is time to make effective utilization of that provision in letter and spirit by looking at the fact that a multilateral pool of vaccines needs to be enlarged as fast as possible, and not just for one-time use, but for sustained use over a period of time. Now, over here, while accepting the importance of patent waivers and in taking forward the issue of vaccine augmentation for Southeast Asian countries, I wanted to draw attention to a couple of other issues. Various surveys that have been done till now on the access to vaccines in different countries are pointing out that in several countries, there is a challenge in what we typically call in business literature as the last mile delivery challenge. And this challenge essentially arises from, perhaps in some cases, insufficient availability of quality logistics, or in some other cases, inadequate availability of vaccine maintenance and storage facilities. And this will become particularly important if countries in the region, like Thailand, for example, go over to the prospect of producing messenger RNA vaccines, which require much tougher and demanding storage conditions as opposed to the other conditions. So in regard, it is not just the question of supporting the call for this level, but it is also important for ASEAN to come together and take a collective view, as it has done on several occasions in the past, to think to what extent logistics issues can be overcome to ensure that vaccines do get to reach the people to be vaccinated as fast as possible. So in that respect, it is not just the WTO's endeavor, but it is also other efforts like, for example, the Quad partnership, which is looking at delivering 1 billion doses to the Indo-Pacific by the end of the year, or the G7 effort to expand vaccine distribution to the region. They all need to be looked at in totality of how much the external efforts to secure waivers need to be backed and complemented by the last mile delivery issues within the region. I would mention two other factors in this regard. I think one of the points to note is that there has been this bit of a debate about, is patent waiver a sufficient condition for ensuring global availability of vaccines? I think there is an important context to the question, and the context to the question is that patent waivers are extremely important. They're required. But having said that, it is important to look at the vaccine production geography in the world and the construction of its supply chain. Now, it is very clear that vaccine production across the world is basically dominated by a handful of countries. around 14 to 15 countries. Most of these are OECD countries. And otherwise, all of them belong to the G20, including emerging markets like China and India. And probably Switzerland is the only exceptional country which does not belong to the G20. The interesting part is that these are countries which make the most vaccines and they consume the most vaccines as well. And at the same time, they are also the largest producers of vaccine ingredients. I think that is the point which is important to be noted, that when it comes to the question of combining patent relaxations with vaccine production, patent relaxations must be backed by efforts to ensure that vaccine ingredients become available to the rest of the world, including countries in Southeast Asia, where this can be manufactured. So if there are instances of countries that are the largest source of vaccine ingredients resorting to domestic security, national security, and domestic priorities to hit upon the fact that no vaccine ingredients will be for first use at home and external use later, then the entire objective of patent waiver will not serve its purpose. So it's important to ensure that the diplomatic efforts to push for a waiver do not just work towards the waiver, but also try to subdue vaccine nationalism as far as possible. I think the combination of the two is the best way in which the world can look forward to, including countries in Southeast Asia and the part of other Asia, like South Asia and the Asia Pacific at large, to have an effective rollout of vaccine. The final point, Chair, that I'd like to make in this regard is that I think the time has probably come to take a different view of COVID-19, in the sense that when we look at Southeast Asia, we have always seen that Southeast Asia has typically been a very resilient region. It has been a region which often has been able to overcome a large number of contextual, local, and regional challenges purely on the basis of regional resilience. The ability of its people to work hard, the ability of its labor to contribute productively to good, strong, resilient supply chains within the region, and also coming together as a collective effort. I think on the issue of vaccines and patent waiver, it is important for Southeast Asia to actually come together as a more collective spirit, in view of the fact that there are a number of things which require to be done in order to ensure that Southeast Asia gets to come back to the earlier pattern of growth momentum that it was enjoying. This is the first time, the year 2020 is the first time when developing Asia encountered a recession in the last 60 years. There are countries where large number of populations have been pushed back to poverty within the region. It is important for the countries to note that part of the economic setback that has happened, come together to take the vaccine management issue as one of the topmost priorities and ensure the availability of vaccines on the basis of the fact that the COVID-19 is not going to go away. But in all probability, COVID-19 might become an endemic from a pandemic. And if that is the case, then countries have to work on the assumption that vaccines need to flow. They need to remain available at all points in time for tackling all varieties of mutants that are coming up. And that requires lifting all possible global barriers to production of vaccines, which include the fifth barrier, and also avoiding efforts at vaccine nationalism. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Palit, and thank you for bringing up the notion of the importance of ASEAN to come as a collective in unity. And then you highlighted that Southeast Asian countries and people has been so far resilient on so many after so many shocks and crises. And COVID-19 would also be another test for Southeast Asia to come as a collective to tackle vaccine management issues and the logistic issues and so on and so forth. We will discuss that later on. And then also you are highlighting the problem of I think this is very important that right now vaccine production is dominated by 14 to 15 countries, most of them, member of the G20s or G7 and so on. But another problem that you are highlighting is that the largest producers also owning the ingredients of vaccine and should be made available to other countries, including in Southeast Asia. I think that's something that we need to ponder later on during the Q&A. Now, the third speaker, I'd like to invite Dr. Tran Kien, School of Law, Vietnam National University in Hanoi, and School of Law, University of Glasgow. 15 minutes is yours, Dr. Tran.
Thank you very much. So can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Thank you very much. So I just want to make sure. First of all, I would like to say thanks to RIS and for organizing this webinar. And I also would like to thank Vietnamese Embassy in India for introducing me to the webinar. I'm very honored to join the webinar and to share some thoughts. The second thing I want to say is that actually I share many of the arguments that my colleagues from Singapore and Thailand have already made. And actually, I also have the quite similar arguments for that, which I will show you later on. But I think that we all come together and we think that we have a lot of things in common. From my point of view, I think that the chief wave or way of the obligation of the member state to protect the IP rights, I think it's the best way. However, thinking like a lawyer, it's just in my case, thinking like a lawyer, it's just the first step. In order to achieve the best result, we need to prepare for the worst scenario, or in other words, we need to envisage or envision what we have to do next beyond the waiver in order to make sure that the equity, the asset, and the inclusion of vaccine distribution can be achieved. So that's what I think. So that's why I came to this webinar with very straightforward point of view. I go straight to the 5 key questions that the organizing committee have raised and allow me to go straight to that and share some of my thoughts. The first thing is the question is how asset equity and inclusion for vaccine distribution can be ensured and the roles of the civil society organizations. I think that's like I said, and I agree with both my colleagues from Singapore and Thailand. Legal means in this case, the chief wave would be the best option and also the most important one. However, we need to think about other steps and other issues we need to tackle in order to achieve the AEI. I mean, technology is very important because without that, we cannot produce vaccines. Even we can waive the patent protection, or we know, but it's just invention. In order to put it or translate it into production and to have a vaccine, a real vaccine, we need technology and manufacturing capacities. However,
excuse me, Dr. Tran, Dr. Amit, could you mute your speaker? All right. Thank you, Dr. Tran. You can continue.
And from the experiences of Vietnam, logistics is also important, equally important. Thanks to the very good role of the army, the armed forces in Vietnam. The armed forces, for example, they have very good logistics systems. They have the Ministry of Health and also the government to distribute and even to administer vaccine shots. So I think that we need to think about that. Everyone really want to make sure that the vaccine can go to those in need. And also we need international and domestic support because I mean we have to face the truth, except for the developed countries like G20 or G7 and very some rare small number of countries like India, South Africa or Thailand or even Vietnam can manage somehow to produce and to manufacture vaccine. A lot of other developing countries and least developed countries would not have that kind of the capacity to ensure the asset and the equity and inclusion of vaccine. So I don't know how they will manage it, but we need to help them. and we need to help them to think about that. And in this case, I really praise the roles of civil society organization. I think they are very important because I have worked with the civil society organization in Vietnam a lot. So I know that they can play a very important role, especially to ensure the equity and to make sure that we can identify problems and any issue that we need to tackle in the process of making sure that the access to the vaccine be achieved. So this is the first question. The second question is compulsory license a better option? I think that like for me, the chief waiver should be the priority and the best option. But we should not phase out compulsory license because it's already there. And if any country can use that to make sure that they can get access to the vaccine, we should encourage them to make use of compulsory license. In my view, is that different country, different situation would require different solution. So we should be somehow local sensible approach to make sure that we achieve the similar result for every country, although we might have different solution. However, I have some kind of the concerns because compulsory license would go to the domestic government, negotiate directly with the pharmaceuticals, and there always be a bargaining power. You know about that, the bargaining power, and in this case, maybe a lot of developing country and least developed country would be in a less powerful position to negotiate with the pharmaceutical, for example, international pharmaceutical companies. So I think coordinated bargain support from other groups would very vital and important for them if they decide, if one country decide to go forward with compulsory license. However, I would like to say chief waste would be the best and the most comprehensive option for us. The third point is does the recent counter proposal by EU make any sense? The answer is obvious no, because it doesn't touch upon the key issue, asset equity and inclusion. Otherwise, it's not a new solution at all. It's the same old story. We already have COVAX, we already have things like that. There's nothing actually answer in that. And they try to avoid the key issues, the key questions, avoid the legal means. It's actually not difficult at all for us to reply or to respond to the counter offer proposal by EU. Because they just focused on the trade, they focused on export. That kind of thing is not at the heart of the problem. And most importantly, I read all the proposal and all the speech and all the statement from the EU. I see no implementation plan at all. So I think that is the thing that we need to put into account or to take into account. And the next question is how the lack of access of mRNA and other medical technologies are going to limit the chief waiver. I mean, for me, thinking like a lawyer, yes. So we need to take it very seriously. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to gain the benefit of waiver, because waiver, like I said, it's just a technical solution. It's an invention. It's an idea. We need to translate it into production. We need capacity. We need technology. We need raw materials. However, I think that we should categorize the problems into different groups, and then we find the solution for specific problems. We have hair products would require raw materials. However, other things like diagnostics or prevention, we might not need raw materials. So we can make sure that we use suitable solution for specific or relevant problems. We should not combine them together, otherwise sometimes we would be confused. So that's what I think. And the last thing is how developing countries can ramp up their production. And interestingly, I see the question here is what's role for IMF and other financial institutions in this regards. I would like to focus on this point. I mean, financing is important, And the idea that you might somehow get access to IMF and other financial institutions like World Bank or like, Asian Development Bank to get a loan to buy vaccine or to fight the pandemic is also a good idea. But please remember about the national debt. A lot of countries, especially developing country and least developed country, already burdensome and seriously affected by COVID-19 financially. So if they have to borrow money again, it would be a great burden for them. We can think about like ODA, we can think about like donation, but if you want to add about like IMF give loans to the country, I think that it would in the long run, in the long term, it would create another problem for the developing country and least developed country to pay back the debt and any loan. So I think that we need to take into account. So I think that all 5 questions and also my thoughts on this. I would like to stop here and we can go into the Q&A and to have discussion about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tran. Thank you for keeping up the time and for sure, thank you for going through the 5 questions and providing your perspectives on how we can respond to the questions. And of course, I think there are questions from the participants today, but because time, I'll go straight to Mr. Tony Salvador of the Third World Network of the Philippines, and 10 to 15 minutes is yours. Mr. Tony.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Felix Vermonte. And thank you also to Mr. Ravi Srinivas for inviting us here. Thank you to RIS and South Center, of course. Allow me to give our perspectives from the civil society this time. I'm not going to go into the technical details. Instead, I just want to share the process by which we try to engage our government, particularly the legislative branch and also the executive branch, with regard to the proposal of India and South Africa. So basically, we have been engaging our government with respect to trade issues for many years now. I can go back, me personally, since 2008 with the Geneva WTO conferences. As soon as we learned about the initiatives of South Africa and India, we thought that it would be best for us in civil society in a developing country to actually study if this makes sense, and if we can have this supported by our own government. So the first thing that we did is we tried to speak to the highest government officials with regard to trade negotiations. So that would mean our Ministry of Trade and Industry. So we call it here Department of Trade and Industry. They were a bit hesitant to support this initiative because they said that they don't want to endanger the relationship with countries which are at that time they say are in the process of giving us vaccines or selling to us vaccines. So having that door shut to us, we thought about engaging then our legislative branch of government. So we have a senator, a lady senator, who has been working with us for many years now on a lot of social justice issues. And we thought we should broach this idea to her. So eventually, we ended up ourselves, Third World Network, drafting a Senate resolution for her to sponsor with our Senate. The idea is that we wanted our Senate to pass a resolution, agree on a resolution, meaning all of the 24 senators agreeing to a resolution whereby they will try to ask the President of the Philippines and our WTO representative, our WTO ambassador, to provide Philippine support to the India and South Africa initiative. So we drafted for her what eventually became Senate Resolution number 560. It's a resolution urging the Executive Department through the Department of Foreign Affairs to support the proposal of India and South Africa for the WTO to suspend the implementation, application, enforcement of the relevant provisions of the TRIPS agreement, but only obviously in relation to COVID-19. In the Philippine process, so this was referred to the Committee on Foreign Relations, which eventually conducted 2 hearings involving all of the important and relevant government agencies. The most important of which is the Department of Foreign Affairs, obviously, the Philippine Intellectual Property Office, the Department of Trade and Industry, and at the same time, they had the good sense to also invite us, civil society. So we were able to present our idea. So it was clear to the executive branch that the idea actually came from us in civil society. Unfortunately, there was a resistance on the part of the primarily the IPO office. They said that they were very alarmist in the sense that they said that we are going to destroy the entire IP legal framework, which of course is not true. That there's already TRIPS flexibilities that we can avail of, and that anyway we don't have manufacturing capacity, so it doesn't make sense for us, and that logistics is one of the main issues. Unfortunately, I must have to say that our bureaucracy, our entire bureaucracy are of the what I want to say conservative type. The orientation is of the conservative type, and unfortunately, it hews well to the agenda and the rhetoric of big pharma. Thereafter, there was a 3rd hearing at our Senate, this time only for CSOs. And we were able to convince the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the Senate that our proposal, the civil society proposal, makes all the sense in the world. And fortunately, the Senate President, then Senate President, but he's now the head of the Foreign Relations, completely sided with us, and even asked the lady Senator Risa Ontiveros to collaborate with her with respect to drafting the actual report that hopefully would be submitted to the Senate for approval of the Senate. So the Senate report provides that the Philippines remains committed to the rule of law, including the respect for intellectual property rights at the national and international levels. And it is precisely in this spirit that the Senate would like to express its support to follow legal processes by which to waive temporarily intellectual property with respect to vaccines, medicines, medical supplies, only for COVID-19. This proposal, this Senate resolution is going through the rounds right now. As of last Thursday, we need only 2 signatures from the senators, and then this report will pass, and thereafter submitted to the Senate for vote. Unfortunately, the Senate is in recess right now, but the senators are still trying to convince the executive branch to support this initiative. So the resolution says that after consultations and careful study of the issues at hand, the Senate recommends the following: pass a resolution that strongly endorses and recommends to the Office of the President through the DFA to support the proposal of India and South Africa for the WTO to suspend temporarily the implementation, application, and enforcement of the TRIPS agreement. So, of course, this is just persuasive. We, in our constitutional arrangements, there's a clear separation of powers between the legislative and the executive branches. Although this is only persuasive on the part of the Senate, fortunately, in this case, most of the senators are allies of the president. So we believe that some pressure or some form of convincing can be had in order to actually convince the president and eventually also convince, of course, our ambassador to the WTO for the Philippine government to support the initiative of India and South Africa. This is all for me, for us from Third World Network, and thank you very much again for giving us this opportunity to share our the little things that we have done here in the Philippines with regard to this issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony, for brief us about the importance of engaging with the government, and in this regard, more on the legislative branch of power in order to convince the president to support the initiative. And also, I think you highlight some problems that already mentioned by the previous speaker about the differences between departments and within the governments that have their own their own consideration on the proposal and probably their own constituency. And this is why civil society is very important in trying to convince them that there are larger needs that needs to be done by the government. Now, I'd like to invite our discussion, Mr. Nirmalya Syam, Senior Program Officer, Health, Intellectual Property and Biodiversity Program at South Central Geneva, to give his perspective on the presentation that have been given earlier by our four speakers. Mr. Nirmalya, floor is yours, probably about 10 minutes. We will still have another 10 minutes for discussion if there's any burning issues.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon and good morning from where I am. Good afternoon to all of you. The presentations indeed have been very rich and clearly brought out very interesting points. I noted the following, and I would just like to add some perspectives on some of these aspects. The first was in the presentation by Mr. Kittitrakul. He pointed out to the fact to the importance of looking at the patent system as a whole in the context of the lessons learned from COVID-19. That's a very important issue to look at in terms of whether TRIPS is fit for purpose, and those are long-term issues to consider beyond the waiver. But also in the context of the immediate implementation of the waiver, one issue to note is that there would be need for policy coherence, internal policy coherence, which is not only policy coherence in terms of getting support for the waiver proposal, but policy coherence would be required in terms of implementation domestically of the waiver. One of the issues to look at there would be that, for example, he referred to in the context of compulsory licenses that one of the issues is political will. And that again boils down to the issue of policy coherence as well. Now, in terms of implementation of the waiver also, the political will would become a critical issue. And there, when we talk of political will, the counterforces that come into operation internationally are from two sources. One is from through unilateral coercive measures, which have been pointed out in several reports. For example, the Commission on HIV a few years back, appointed by the Secretary General of the UN, mentioned this very eloquently in their report. And also through TRIPS plus standards, which exist in free trade agreements. This has been discussed in our previous webinars in this series, that there is a need to also look at how to counter these unilateral coercive actions or use of TRIPS plus obligations to cut down or undercut the domestic implementation of the waiver. The South Center, in terms of its research, has also been looking at it, and would like to point out that some interesting provisions exist. For example, in the context of the USMCA or the comprehensive TPP agreement, to which some of the countries from the region are parties to. which mentions that if the WTO agrees to a waiver, and if the terms of the free trade agreement, in this case the CPTPP, come into conflict with the implementation of the waiver, come in the way of implementation of the waiver, the parties will negotiate, come into negotiation under the context of the CPTPP to give effect to the TRIPS waiver. So that is an important issue to point to keep note of, for example, as a means to address in the context of the CPTPP. Those were 2 points that I wanted to bring in terms of policy coherence, and also looking at modalities of safeguarding implementation of the waiver through flexibilities that could be carved out or available in the CPTPP or other free trade agreements. There is also the possibility of issuing side letters subsequent to the adoption of the free trade agreements to give effect to the waiver, to ensure that those obligations do not come in the way. And also there could be opportunities to look at the possible textual language in the waiver decision itself to ensure that other agreements in the context of free trade agreements that have been negotiated do not come in the way of implementation of the waiver. One of the issues that also was brought up by Dr. Palit in his presentation was the need for complementary measures, that in addition to the waiver, we need to also look at access to raw materials, for example, access to technology issues have been brought about, and we need to look at those aspects as well. One of the important forums where these discussions could also be looked at and looking at complementarities would be the WHO. Now, already we have the COVAX facility, which is a voluntary mechanism. We have the CTAP facility, which was also established by the WHO as a voluntary mechanism, a technology access pool, which is currently empty, or largely empty. Few diagnostics probably have pledged to contribute in there, but we have so far got nothing in there. Now, the challenge there is, how do we take the discussion to the next level to take it beyond voluntarism in terms of the multilateral mechanisms that have been developed, and to make it more effective, more mandatory, more effective, and complementary, and facilitated through the waiver. So the waiver would then work in tandem with such mechanisms if we also focus on that pillar as well. So this is not necessarily inside the WTO, but in other forums. Finally, I would note the importance of civil society engagement, as Mr. Tony had brought out, in terms of ensuring this policy coherence that I talked about happens at the ground level. And as we can see that some of the CSO activism has resulted in Senate letters, etc., that has pushed governments towards supporting the waiver proposal. Similar support would be perhaps required even in terms of implementation of the waiver once the waiver is negotiated. Now, in terms of the EU proposal, I think one of the strategic points to note is that, as panelists have very rightly pointed out, is that this is not ambitious. This is not adding anything new in terms of the problem at hand. But what is the objective and purpose of such a proposal then is something that we need to keep strategically in mind. And the objective is to put something in to keep the discussion going forward and in a way a filibustering move. And therefore, in terms of the Geneva discussions, it would be critical to sort of ensure and bring that demand up from the ground, that the focus of the discussions must remain on the waiver proposal, and not deviate into other tertiary proposals, which will not really resolve the problem that the waiver proposal seeks to address. And in terms of the issue of vaccines and mRNA, of course, the waiver would be important for access to mRNA technologies, as has been eloquently pointed out in a Nature article interview by the vaccine, develop mRNA vaccine, develop scientist who in Thailand who's been developing the mRNA vaccine. But we need to also look at the issue beyond vaccines to look at therapeutics. It's been about 18 months since the pandemic started. If you assume that in the first month when the pandemic happened, companies redirected their research into antibiotics for COVID-19 and filed patents at that point of time. Over the summer, probably we will have these patent applications being published, because the patent applications typically get filed after 18 months from their publication. And this is the time period when these applications would come into the public domain, in terms of we will get to know what kind of patent applications have been filed. And it is possible that there could be a plethora of multiple patent applications claiming formulations or use for COVID-19, not only just new drugs, but repurposing existing molecules, etc. And we need to look at it very, very closely. And in that context, the waiver would be a very, very helpful tool, because, for example, patent offices could be absolved of the responsibility of granting those patents at this stage and sort of examining those patents, for example, and the technologies would then be more accessible because the knowledge would have been published. So I would stop with those thoughts, and of course would be happy to contribute to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malia, for a very comprehensive take on the presentations and putting things into perspective. Now, if I may, I would not repeat, but there are, I think, some important points that you raised about this, all the presentation, and how you put things into similar perspective or different one. Number one, I think what we gather today from the discussion is that we need policy coherence, and that's in need. And then the political will is important, because we will face unilateral coercive measures, but so we need to counter the unilateral coercive measures. Number two, I think you are raising one issue that have not been touched by the speakers, the four speakers, that is the relationship between WTO as a global platform with regional trade agreement platform like CPTPP or TPP, or probably with other regions, and how they would come together, or they would against one another when it comes to the waiver issues later on. Number three, I think the importance of CSO is highlighted once again by yourself, because all these negotiations happens or started at the grassroots level, and engagement with civil society is very important, because they've done a wonderful job, like Tony has described us what happened in the Philippines and his network there. So now we still have, I think, about 5 to 10 minutes for discussion. If there is a comment that needs to be responded, I would welcome. But there is one comment in the chat box. I think, if I may read, and then any of the speakers can respond. From Mr. Haribabu, if I'm not I hope I pronounce your name right. The majority of the signatories to WTO must demand that the rules of WTO relating to TRIPS be changed in the context of the pandemic. The rule should be that the IPRS will be suspended on the facts and ingredients on humanitarian consideration. So I think that's not a question. That's more of a statement. Now, if any of the four speakers would like to give another thought, 1 or 2 minutes, I think we can still accommodate. Anyone? No?
Chair, with your permission, if I might respond
Yes.
To this particular comment. Firstly, I think I appreciate the sentiment expressed in the comment. It is very important to look for a comprehensive, effective, and purposeful waiver that would also cover the vaccine ingredients. But this is just to allude to the character of the vaccine production geography that I alluded to in my remarks, that ultimately the biologics of the world in their total production are largely dominated by 14 to 15 countries. So I think these are also countries which are the big economies, the large economies, and to an extent they hold the economic balance of power within the multilateral economic system. So it's very important for them to actually reach an understanding over the fact that vaccine ingredient free flow and access to the rest of the world is as important as applying patent waivers. One cannot be successful without the other. So the discussion has to proceed on two prongs. If one proceeds exclusive of the other, then the entire objective of greater public health advancement in the context of that COVID-19 will remain unfulfilled. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi. Anyone? The other three, if you have some thoughts, or you would raise another issue. If no, that will be okay, because we are already at the end of the session, given the time that is allotted to us. Thank you very much for all the speakers and the discussion, and of course the participants who are listening and watching this session. Now I'd like to return the screen to Mr. Nirmalya for his photo. Thanks.
To Chair. This is the last of the series of webinars on the TRIPS waiver that the South Center and RIS have co-organized over the past 4 weekends. We would really like to, first of all, thank all the panelists, yourself, Chair, for taking the time out today and contributing to this very rich discussion. And we would also thank our colleagues at RIS, and Professor Chaturvedi, Professor Srinivas, for also bearing with us, for your time and patience in terms of the feedback loop that involves in terms of operating in different time zones, and getting together a very good set of panelists from each of the regions that we had covered over the last 4 sessions. Last but not least, I would like to also thank the technical team at RIS, which has facilitated this excellent series of webinars through the WebEx platform. The recording and the summary of these are also available on the website of the RIS, and they have been very promptly doing that. So a big thank you to them as well for all their support on this. As was mentioned, the South Center and the RIS will come out with a joint publication on the TRIPS waiver issue. And of course, the contributions that you have made today and the contributions that the other panelists have made in the past in this webinar series will inform that publication. And we look forward to engaging further with you. And hopefully, with the summer, we will have much to cheer about in terms of how the waiver discussion progresses. And we look forward to continuing our collaboration in the future with RIS, and also to converse with you at a point of time in the future. Thank you, and wish you a good summer.
Thank you. Stay healthy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ravi.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Stay
much.
safe.